As industrial agriculture developed based on large-scale monoculture in the 20th century, subsistence agriculture remained the predominant form of agriculture for about 2 billion people. Modern agricultural practices, plant breeding, agrochemicals such as pesticides and fertilizers, and technical development have significantly increased crop yields, but have caused widespread ecological and environmental damage. Many of the foods and fabrics we use in our daily lives come from agriculture. The most common agricultural products are cotton, wool, and leather. The industry also provides wood for construction and paper products. It is possible that the products, and the farming methods, used in one part of the world may differ from another. Agriculture is the art and science of cultivating the soil, growing crops, and raising livestock. It includes the preparation of plant and animal products for people to use and their distribution to markets. Agricultural practices include raising plants and livestock. As a result of agriculture, sedentary human civilization developed in cities because of surplus food created by farming domesticated species. It has been thousands of years since agriculture began. Around 11,500 years ago, farmers began to plant wild grains they had been gathering for at least 105,000 years. Around 10,000 years ago, livestock such as cattle, sheep, and pigs were domesticated. At least 11 regions around the world have independently cultivated plants. As industrial agriculture developed based on large-scale monoculture in the 20th century, subsistence agriculture remained the predominant form of agriculture for about 2 billion people. Modern agricultural practices, plant breeding, agrochemicals such as pesticides and fertilizers, and technical development have significantly increased crop yields, but have caused widespread ecological and environmental damage. In the same way, selective breeding and modern methods of animal husbandry have increased meat output, but they have raised concerns about animal welfare and environmental damage. In addition to global warming, deforestation, antibiotic resistance, and growth hormones in industrial meat production, environmental issues include depletion of aquifers, and depletion of wetlands. Environmental degradation caused by agriculture, such as biodiversity loss, desertification, soil degradation, and global warming, can decrease crop yields. The use of genetically modified organisms is widespread in the world, although some are banned in certain countries. We can broadly group agricultural products into 4 categories: foods, fibers, fuels, and raw materials, such as rubber. There are 6 food categories: cereals, grains, vegetables, fruits, oils, meat, milk, fungi, and eggs. It is estimated that over 1/3 of the world's workforce works in agriculture, second only to the service sector. However, in recent decades, the number of agricultural workers decreased worldwide, especially in developing countries where small holdings have been supplanted by industrial agriculture. The word agriculture is a late Middle English adaptation of Latin agricultura, from ager field and cultura cultivation or growing. Some species of ants, termites, and beetles have been cultivating crops as early as 60 million years ago, although agriculture usually refers to human activities. The definition of agriculture is varied, but in its broadest sense it involves the use of natural resources to produce commodities that sustain life, such as food, fiber, forest products, horticultural crops, and their associated services. By this definition, agriculture includes arable farming, horticulture, animal husbandry, and forestry, but horticulture and forestry are often excluded. Farming in history can be traced to the domestication of plants and animals, as well as the evolution of efficient methods of raising them. A growing diversity of taxa was associated with agriculture, which developed independently in different parts of the globe. It is possible for at least 11 independent centers of origin to exist in the Old World and the New World. Approximately 105,000 years ago, people began gathering and eating wild grains. Although domestication followed later in history. Around 9500 BC, Ethiopian emmer wheat evolved into einkorn wheat, hulled barley, legumes, bitter vetch, chickpeas, and flax, which are the 8 Neolithic founder crops. The cultivation of rye may have begun earlier than thought, but this is highly controversial. The first rice cultivation in China dates back to 6200 BC, while mung, soy, and Antiquity beans were domesticated in 5700 BC. Domesticated pigs first appeared in Mesopotamia around 11,000 BC, followed by sheep between 11,000 and 9,000 BC. In modern Turkey and India, cattle were domesticated from wild aurochs around 8,500 BC. Domestication of sorghum occurred in the Sahel region of Africa by 3000 BC. Despite being domesticated late, camels were domesticated relatively early, perhaps as late as 3000 BC. Several plant species were first cultivated in South America as early as 9000 BCE, which led to the cultivation of only minor crops. Among the various domesticated crops in South America were potatoes, beans, tomatoes, peanuts, coca, llamas, alpacas, and guinea pigs, which were domesticated between 8000 BC and 5000 BC. It is believed that cassava was domesticated in the Amazon basin no later than 7000 BC. Moreover, it is believed that Mesoamericans domesticated and genetically modified wild teos Zea maize, to produce domestic maize, which made its way to South America about 7000 BC. During the Neolithic Age, cotton was domesticated in Peru by 4200 BC, another cotton species was domesticated in Mesoamerica, which became by far the most important type of cotton during the modern era. Around 7000 BC, New Guineans domesticated sugarcane and some root vegetables. A similar period in Papua New Guinea saw banana cultivation and hybridization. Agriculturists in Australia developed the first crops ranging from yams to bananas at an unspecified time period, with the oldest evidence dating to 6600 BC in the form of the older Budj eel traps. Ancient Egypt, Ancient Sumer, the Indian subcontinent's Indus Valley Civilization, Ancient China, and Ancient Greece witnessed the intensification of agriculture from 3300 BC to 3100 BC. Both the Republic and the Empire expanded ancient Rome during the Iron Age and era of classical antiquity. A bedrock of medieval agriculture was the manorial system, which grew out of the ancient Mediterranean and Western Europe. A variety of crop plants were spread throughout Europe and the Islamic world during the Middle Ages, including sugar, rice, cotton, and fruit trees such as the orange from Al-Andalus to Europe. During the Columbian Exchange in 1492, Christopher Columbus brought New World crops over to Europe, including maize, potatoes, tomatoes, sweet potatoes, and manioc, and Old World crops back to the Americas, that included wheat, barley, rice, and turnips. Since the Neolithic Revolution started in the 19th century, irrigation, crop rotation, and fertilizers have been heavily developed. Human labor was replaced by mechanization in agriculture, supplemented by synthetic fertilizers, pesticides, and selective breeding in the developed world, as well as developing nations, since 1900. Ammonium nitrate fertilizer was synthesized using the Haber-Bosch process on an industrial scale, significantly increasing crop yields. Overpopulation, water pollution, biofuels, genetically modified organisms, tariffs, and farm subsidies are some of the social, political, and environmental issues linked to modern agriculture. The development of organic farming became an alternative to synthetic pesticides around the turn of the 20th century. A growing number of people were able to live on hunting and gathering before agriculture was developed. It is believed that agricultural activity began independently in 11 different centers throughout the world, with different taxa in each area. The process of collecting and eating wild grains began nearly 105,000 years ago. There were 8 Neolithic founder crops cultivated in the Levant nearly 11,500 years ago, including emmer and einkorn wheat, hulled barley, peas, lentils, bittervetch, chickpeas, and flax. Agricultural rice in China began around 11,500 BC, with the earliest known cultivation dating back to 5,700 BC, followed by mung, soy, and Antiquity beans. Around 13,000 to 11,000 years ago, sheep were domesticated in Mesopotamia. The domestication of cattle began in modern Turkey and Pakistan approximately 10,500 years ago when aurochs were wild. About 10,500 years ago, domesticating wild boars brought about pig production in Eurasia, including Europe, East Asia, and Southwest Asia. Potatoes were domesticated somewhere between 10,000 and 7,000 years ago in South America, along with beans, coca, llamas, alpacas, and guinea pigs. Around 9,000 years ago, New Guineans domesticated sugarcane and some root vegetables. Africa's Sahel region is where sorghum was domesticated 7,000 years ago. 5,600 years ago, cotton was domesticated in Peru and then in Eurasia independent of Peru. Around 6,000 years ago, wild Teos Inte was bred into maize in Mesoamerica. A number of hypotheses have been put forward to explain the history of agriculture. Researchers have found an initial period of increased sedentism and intensification during the transition from hunter-gatherer societies to agricultural societies, exemplified by the Natufian culture in the Levant and the early Chinese Neolithic in China. Then, previously harvested wild stands began to be planted and gradually domesticated. Agriculture has different cropping systems on different farms based on a number of factors such as resources and constraints, geography and climate of the farm, government policies, economic, social, and political pressures, and the farmer's philosophy and culture. Slash and burn, or shifting cultivation, is a method that burns forests in order to release nutrients that can be used to grow annual crops and persistent plants for several years. Afterwards, the farmer leaves the plot fallow to regrow forest, and moves to a new plot, returning after a considerable time. If population density grows, a shorter fallow period is necessary, as well as fertilizer and pesticide input. During annual cultivation, there is no fallow period, so the intensity of cultivation increases with time. As a result, more fertilizer and pesticides are needed. In addition to monoculture, further industrialization made it possible to plant large acres with one cultivar. Since there is little biodiversity in the area, nutrients are used uniformly and pests tend to accumulate, requiring a greater use of pesticides and fertilizers. The polyculture method of farming involves growing multiple crops concurrently in the same year. This method is known as multiple cropping, while intercropping involves growing several crops simultaneously. It may be impossible to plant multiple crops in a year in subtropical or arid environments due to rainfall restrictions. Irrigation may be required. There are perennial crops being grown in all of these environments: coffee, chocolate, followed by agroforestry systems. Traditionally, highly productive annual agriculture has become the dominant agricultural system in temperate environments in which grassland or prairie ecosystems predominate. There are many categories of food crops, including cereals, legumes, forage, fruits, and vegetables. A variety of natural fibers are available, including cotton, wool, hemp, silk, and flax. These fibers are grown in specific regions throughout the world. The practice of raising and breeding animals for meat, milk, eggs, wool, as well as for work and transportation, is animal husbandry. Throughout history, working animals like horses, mules, oxen, water buffalo, camels, llamas, alpacas, donkeys, and dogs have cultivated fields, harvested crops, and transported farm products. According to the feed source, livestock production systems can be classified as grassland-based, mixed, or landless. Approximately 1.3 billion people are employed by the livestock sector on Earth's ice and water-free surfaces. The livestock industry experienced a dramatic increase between the 1960s and 2000s, both in terms of number and weight of carcasses, especially among cattle, pigs, and chickens, the latter of which had production increase by almost tenfold. A significant increase in milk production and egg production was also seen in non-meat animals, such as milk cows and chickens that produce eggs. In the coming years, the number of cattle, sheep, and goats is expected to increase significantly. As the sector of food production that grows at the fastest rate, aquaculture or fish farming, the production of fish intended for human consumption in confined environments, grew by 9% annually between 1975 and 2007. Producing livestock breeds and crossbreeds that produced more production during the second half of the 20th century meant disregarding the need for genetic diversity. A lack of genetic diversity and resources has contributed to a loss of disease resistance and local adaptations among livestock breeds. As a result, more livestock breeds are susceptible to disease. To feed ruminant animals, pastures, shrubland, and rangeland are used in grassland-based livestock production. Although there are other nutrients available, manure serves as the most important source of nutrients in the grassland. Approximately 30–40 million pastoralists depend on this system in areas where farming is not feasible due to weather or soil conditions. For ruminant and monogastric livestock, mainly chickens and pigs, mixed production systems utilize pasture land, fodder crops, and grain feed crops. A mixed system usually recycles manure as fertilizer for crops. System of landless farming depends on feed from outside the farm, which is more prevalent in member countries of the Organization for Economic Cooperation and Development, OECD. Agricultural producers are increasingly relying on synthetic fertilizers for crop production, which poses a challenge as well as a pollution concern. Most of the global supply of poultry and pork is produced at these facilities by industrialized countries. Between 2003 and 2030, confined animal feeding operations, sometimes referred to as factory farming, are estimated to account for 75% of the growth in livestock production. The growth in Asia is largely the result of developing countries, with less growth in Africa. There is controversy surrounding practice in commercial livestock production, including the use of growth hormones. Tillage is a technique for amending the soil with tools such as the harrow or plow for purposes of planting, adding nutrients, or controlling pests. The intensity of tillage can range from no-till to conventional. This may improve productivity by warming the soil, incorporating fertilizer, and controlling weeds, but at the same time makes soil more likely to erode, triggers the breakdown of organic matter to release CO2, and reduces the diversity and abundance of soil life. In addition to weeds, insects, and diseases, pest control also addresses ants, rodents, and birds. A variety of chemicals, pesticides, biologicals, biocontrols, mechanicals, tillage, and cultural practices are used. Among the cultural practices are crop rotation, culling, cover crops, intercropping, composting, avoidance, and resistance. In the case of an integrated pest management program, all of these methods are used to reduce pest populations to levels that would not cause economic loss, and pesticides are used only when necessary. In addition to source of nutrient input, nutrient management also involves the way nutrient manure produced by livestock is used. Chemical fertilizers, green manure, compost, and minerals are some fertilizers that can be used as nutrient inputs. Cultural techniques such as crop rotation or fallow periods can also be used to manage crop nutrition. Basically, either livestock are pastured near crops or manure is applied to cropland or pastures when the crops are growing, such as in the case of managed intensive rotational grazing. In most parts of the world, rainfall is inadequate or erratic, so water management is necessary. Irrigation is sometimes used to supplement rainfall. Farming in other parts of the world, such as the Great Plains in the US and Canada, uses a fallow year to conserve soil moisture for the following crop growing season. Worldwide, 70% of fresh water is used for agriculture. According to a report by the International Food Policy Research Institute, agricultural technologies will have the greatest impact on food production if adopted in combination with each other. The International Food Policy Research Institute calculated that by 2050, 11 technologies could have significant effects on agricultural productivity, food security, and trade, with the number of hungry people being reduced by as much as 40% and food prices decreasing by almost 50%. Ecosystem service payments are a way to provide farmers with additional incentives to conserve various environmental aspects. To improve fresh water supplies, reforestation could be paid for upstream of a city. Early in the 1700s, Great Britain and the Low Countries, Belgium, Luxembourg, and the Netherlands, which are located below sea level, experienced an important agricultural development. In Europe as well as the colonies, especially in the United States and Canada, new agricultural inventions increased food production. It was Jethro Tull who is credited with inventing the horse-drawn seed drill that was one of the most important innovations of this period. Previously, farmers had to sow seeds by hand. Tull's drill made rows of holes that the seeds could be sown through. In Europe, seed drilling became more widespread towards the end of the 18th century. In the United States, many machines have been developed. Eli Whitney invented the cotton gin in 1794, which shortened the processing time for cotton fiber separation. A mechanical reaper designed by Cyrus McCormick helped modernize grain processing in the 1830s. In about the same time period, John and Hiram Pitts introduced a horse-powered thresher, which made the separation of grain from chaff and straw quicker. In 1837, Deere introduced a steel plow that allowed him to work tough prairie soil with less horsepower. Several important farming methods were also introduced at the same time. In order to increase livestock productivity and size, farmers selectively breed animals, breeding those with desirable traits. Mongolian nomads were selectively breeding horses in the Bronze Age according to evidence found in the Bronze Age. After the 18th century, Europe began to practice selective breeding extensively. Its quality meat and long, coarse wool made it a popular animal in England at that time. Selective breeding could also be used to improve plants. The heredity studies of Gregor Mendel were first published in Austria in 1866. As a result of his studies in pea plants, Mendel discovered how traits were passed from generation to generation. As a result, genetics played a key role in crop improvement. This period also saw the development of new crop rotation techniques. Throughout the rest of the 20th century, a number of these techniques were adopted throughout Europe. The English Norfolk four-field system, for example, was quite successful. There were several crops that were rotated yearly, including wheat, turnips, barley, clover, and ryegrass. Farmers were able to plant more without leaving any land unplanted because the soil had been enriched with nutrients. However, these developments did not affect the majority of the world. The old ways of farming were still used in Asia, Australia, Africa, and South America. Through random experimentation, humans have created new species of animals and plants for centuries. There were many strains of high-yield wheat and rice developed between the 1950s and 1960s. Parts of Asia and Mexico were introduced to many of them. This led to a rapid increase in grain production in these areas. It was known as the Green Revolution. The Green Revolution led to problems as well as successes. New strains of crops require chemical fertilizers, pesticides, and irrigation to produce high yields. Independent farmers are unable to afford the new technology in many developing countries, so big businesses have taken over agriculture in these countries. Plants and animals native to the area are also affected by the new, high-production crops. It took scientists and farmers a long time to understand why the new strains emerged. Eventually, a new green revolution emerged, genetic modification of foods. There are genes within every cell, which determine many of an organism's characteristics. An organism's genetic makeup and how it acquires these characteristics is the subject of genetics. By gaining a more sophisticated understanding of genetics, individuals are able to scientifically select characteristics to reproduce. The selective breeding process for both plants and animals has undergone a transformation due to the advancement of technology. Several crops and livestock traits were enhanced during the 1970s, when scientists discovered they were able to rearrange genes and add new ones to promote disease resistance, productivity, and other desirable characteristics. GMOs, as well as foods containing genetically modified organisms, are increasingly common in the developed world. Microbes, plants, and animals can have their DNA altered by biotechnology. Those organisms that have genes or DNA derived from another species are known as transgenic organisms. It is possible to add, splice, genes from Arctic plants into the DNA of strawberry plants to increase their resistance to cold and therefore extend their season. Transgenic strawberries would be the result. The company sells genetically engineered seeds that are resistant to certain herbicides and pesticides. In addition to killing weeds and other plants that threaten the crop, herbicides can be used on these seeds without affecting the crop. Animal husbandry, raising domestic animals with the aid of biotechnology, has advanced thanks to advances in biotechnology. Compared to the animals of yesterday, current farm animals are bigger and grow faster. One example would be cows, which graze. In order to digest grass and other crops, cows have evolved digestive systems. The digestive system of a cow becomes acidic when it eats grains such as corn. Developing bacteria like E. coli become easier because of that. As well as causing harm to the cow, bacterial infections can also infect people's milk and meat when they consume the milk or meat of the cow. Feed corn is spliced with antibiotics to prevent infections of this type. This practice dates back to the 1950s when antibiotics were used to stimulate cattle growth. As a result, livestock and humans have developed antibiotic-resistant bacteria over time. Frequently, anabolic steroids are also given to cattle so that they get bigger and faster. Foods containing genetically modified organisms are surrounded by controversy. Farmers who grow GM crops increase their productivity while using less labor and fewer resources. Genetically modified foods are popular among consumers. GM vegetables and fruits last longer and bruise less easily. Meats are tastier, healthier, and more tender.